My name is Margaret Whitfield. Everyone calls me Margot. I am 68 years old, and on the second Saturday of October, I stood behind a folding table at the Millbrook Harvest Craft Fair and listened to my daughter-in-law tell a young couple to ignore me. "That's just my mother-in-law's little hobby," she said, waving one hand at the quilt folded behind her jewelry display like it was a stack of dish towels. "Don't mind her." I want to tell you the worst part of that sentence. You're probably guessing it was the word hobby. It wasn't. The worst part came 4 hours later, when a woman in a navy blazer walked to the front of that exhibit hall with a microphone, and read my name, and my quilt's name, out loud, to 300 people. And Brittany was standing 2 feet away from me when it happened. Let me back up. I spent 31 years as a textile conservator. Most people don't know what that means, so I'll say it simply: museums and private collectors paid me to keep old fabric from dying. Wedding dresses from 1890. Battle flags. A quilt believed to have crossed the Oregon Trail in a wagon bed. I held pieces of history in my hands under a magnifying lamp, stitch by stitch, for 3 decades, and I retired from the Historical Textile Institute 9 years ago with a pension, a good name in a small professional world, and hands that still shake slightly from arthritis but have never once dropped a needle. My husband Frank died 6 years ago. Heart, sudden, no long goodbye. After that, the quiet in the house got loud, if that makes sense to you. So I did what I'd always done when a thing sat heavy on me. I sewed. For 14 months, I worked on a quilt called Anna's Crossing. Anna was my great-grandmother. She came through Ellis Island in 1912 with a tin box, a wool coat, and $11 sewn into her hem. I hand-dyed the fabric myself to get the gray-green of the Atlantic in November. I hid a small locket-shaped pocket in the corner block, stitched shut, holding a photocopy of her real immigration papers. It is, without false modesty, the best thing I have ever made. I told almost no one I'd entered it in the National Quilters Society's Traveling Best in Show competition back in March. Not because I was ashamed. Because at 68, wanting something that badly, in front of people who love you, feels like handing them a stone to throw if it doesn't work out. So I mailed the application myself. I didn't tell my son Trevor. I didn't tell Brittany. I told exactly one person, my granddaughter Sophie, 15, who found the confirmation email open on my laptop one afternoon and swore, with her hand actually on her heart, that she wouldn't say a word. Trevor runs a landscaping business that has been treading water for 3 years. Brittany sells handmade resin jewelry and soy candles under the name Brittany and Bloom. 2 years ago, when Trevor's business nearly folded, I lent them $42,000 from Frank's life insurance. There was a signed agreement. 11 monthly payments came in on time. Then, quietly, they stopped, and I didn't chase it, because that's not how I was raised to treat my own son. I'm telling you all of this now so that later, when it matters, you already have it. The Millbrook Fair happens every October in the same exhibit hall where, this year, the regional judging for the National Quilters Society's Best in Show category was also being held, in a roped-off section at the back. Small towns do that, combine the craft fair with a juried show to bring in bigger crowds. I'd known that for months. It's exactly why I'd chosen to enter through the Millbrook satellite site instead of shipping my quilt across the country. I could enter my life's best work and still be home in time for supper. 3 weeks before the fair, Brittany called a family dinner to discuss logistics. She'd landed a meeting, she said, with a buyer from a boutique chain out of Hartford, someone scouting handmade goods for 6 store locations. If this went well, Brittany and Bloom could triple in size by spring. So here's the thing, she said, not quite looking at me. The booth's only 10 feet wide. We really need all of it for the display units. I was thinking your quilts could just go in a bin under the table. For, you know, if anyone specifically asks. Trevor looked at his plate. I said that was fine. I want you to notice that. I said it was fine, because I had a secret in my back pocket that made the front of a folding table feel very small and very unimportant. If you've ever shrunk yourself down at your own family's table because it was easier than making anyone uncomfortable, Type I see it in the comments right now, because this story is about to turn, and you deserve to watch it happen. 2 days before the fair, Sophie showed up at my house with her phone already unlocked, already open to a group chat, and a look on her face I hadn't seen since she was 7 and broke my reading lamp. "Nana, I need to show you something. Please don't be upset with me for showing you." It was a text thread between Brittany and her sister. I'm going to read you 3 lines exactly as they were typed, because exact words matter more than my memory of feelings. "Brittany, once we get the Hartford deal signed we won't need the shared booth anymore." Which honestly is a relief, BC his mom's blanket clutter takes up half the table anyway. "Brittany, I already emailed the fair coordinator in August asking if we could get extra table space since one vendor isn't really selling, just doing it as a hobby." Brittany, LOL, don't tell Trevor I said that, he gets weird about her feelings. I read it twice. Then I asked Sophie to forward it to my own phone, which she did, hands trembling a little, because 15-year-olds understand betrayal faster than adults like to admit. Here's the piece that mattered most to me, and I want you to sit with it the way I did. This wasn't a slip of the tongue at a folding table. This was a plan, in writing, dated in August, 2 months before the fair, while I was quietly finishing hand-stitching the binding on a quilt about a woman who crossed an ocean with $11 and nothing else, because she believed she was worth more than what people assumed of her. I called the fair coordinator that same afternoon, a woman named Diane I'd known for 11 years through the Historical Society board. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply asked, plainly, whether a request had come in about my table space. "Margot," she said, "I got an email back in August, yes." I told her booth allocation doesn't work that way, and I never acted on it. I actually forwarded that email to you by mistake instead of to my assistant last week, did you not see it? I hadn't. I went and found it in my inbox that evening, buried under coupon emails, sitting there for 6 days like a landmine I'd walked past without knowing it. I printed it. I folded it once, the way I fold a pattern I'm not ready to cut yet, and I put it in my sewing box, underneath the extra backing fabric for Anna's crossing. Then I went looking for one more thing. I pulled out the folder where I keep Frank's estate paperwork, and inside it, the loan agreement Trevor and Brittany signed 2 years ago. $42,000. 11 payments received. Then nothing. 19 months of nothing. I want you to hear those numbers the way I heard them that night at my kitchen table, under the lamp, with my reading glasses pushed up on my nose. $42,000. 11 payments. 19 months of silence. I hadn't asked, because I told myself family doesn't keep score. But somewhere in that same 19 months, my daughter-in-law had found time to write an email asking a stranger to shrink my table because I was, in her words, just a hobby. If you've ever quietly covered for family while they quietly stopped seeing you as anything but useful, or invisible, type I see it again, because we are one scene away from the fair. I didn't confront anyone that week. I want to be honest about why. Part of it was strategy, I'll admit that. But the bigger part was that I still wasn't sure, 3 days before the fair, whether I even wanted to say anything at all. There's a particular kind of tired that comes from being underestimated by people who share your last name, and sometimes that tired just wants quiet, not a scene. What changed my mind was smaller than you'd expect. Thursday night, I called the Historical Textile Institute to ask a former colleague, David, whether he knew anything about who typically judged the Millbrook Satellite Round for the National Quilters Society. Just curiosity, I told him. He laughed and said the head judge this year was a woman named Deborah Pierce, and did I remember her, because 11 years ago I'd been the one who authenticated a Pierce family quilt for a Smithsonian traveling exhibit, back when Deborah was still a junior curator terrified of her own family's temper about that quilt's provenance. I did remember her. I remembered her hands shaking almost as much as mine do now, the day I told her the quilt was genuine. I didn't tell David why I was asking. I just said thank you, and hung up, and sat with my tea until it went cold. I decided, that night, on exactly 3 things. I would bring the quilt myself, entered under my full name, Margaret and Whitfield, the way I'd registered it in March. I would bring the fair coordinator's email and the loan agreement, folded, in my bag, not to wave around, but to have, the way you carry an umbrella you hope you won't need. And I would wear Frank's mother's brooch on my collar, the one I wear to exactly two kinds of events, funerals, and days I need to remember who I actually am. I almost called Sophie that night to tell her not to worry about any of it, that I'd just let the table thing go quietly like always. I picked up the phone. I put it back down. Some habits take 68 years to build and one Thursday night to finally set down. Saturday morning, the exhibit hall smelled like kettle corn and cedar and the particular metallic tang of a coffee urn that's been on since 6 a.m. Brittany's display went up first, white shelving, gold wire racks, little cards that said handcrafted with love. My quilt went into a plastic storage bin under the table, exactly as discussed, folded into a square roughly the size of a throw pillow, Anna's whole crossing compressed into something you'd trip over reaching for napkins. Around 11, a woman in her 50s, nice wool coat, stopped at our table and asked what was in the bin peeking out from under the tablecloth. "Oh, ignore that," Brittany said, laughing lightly, already turning back to her candles. "That's just my mother-in-law's little hobby. She likes to bring one along. Don't mind her." I didn't say anything. I have made a study, over 68 years, of not saying anything at the exact moment someone expects you to. The woman in the wool coat gave me a small, apologetic smile, the kind strangers give you when they've just watched you get diminished and don't know whose job it is to fix it. She moved on. I let her. At 11:40, the loudspeaker crackled, and a voice, Diane's voice, asked all Best in Show entrants to gather near the judging platform for the noon announcement. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I did not go get the quilt from the bin, because I already knew, from the entry confirmation in March, exactly which piece was walking up to that platform, and it wasn't in my hands. It had been sitting in the juried display since 8 that morning, roped off, with a small typed card reading Anna's Crossing, M.A. Whitfield. Brittany glanced at me. "Where are you going?" "To listen," I said. "I want you to picture the next 4 minutes with me, because I've replayed them more times than I can count." Deborah Pierce took the microphone. Navy blazer, reading glasses on a chain, the same steady hands I remembered from 11 years ago, except not shaking this time. She thanked the judges, thanked Millbrook, and then said the category winner for this year's National Traveling Best in Show had been, in her words, one of the most technically extraordinary entries this satellite site has ever produced, a hand-dyed, hand-quilted narrative piece with a hidden archival element that our panel didn't discover until the second round of judging, and frankly, none of us have stopped talking about it since. She read the title. Anna's Crossing. She read the name. Margaret and Whitfield. And then she looked up, scanning the crowd, and said, "Is there a Margaret Whitfield here? Because I believe I already know this name from somewhere else entirely." I walked up. My knees are not what they were, so it wasn't a fast walk, but it was a steady one, and I had Frank's mother's brooch on my collar the whole way. Deborah's face changed the moment she saw mine. Margaret Whitfield. The textile conservator. "You authenticated my grandmother's quilt for the Smithsonian loan in, good Lord, it must be 11 years now." 11 years in March, I said. She turned to the crowd, still holding the microphone, and said something I didn't ask her to say and will remember for the rest of my life. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand what you're looking at today. This is not a hobbyist's quilt. This woman spent 3 decades as one of the most respected textile conservators in this country. What she's done with Anna's Crossing, the hand-dyeing, the archival pocket, the stitch density, this is museum-level work made by someone who could have simply retired and rested. She didn't." I heard, somewhere behind me in the crowd, a single word land, hobby. Someone repeating it, disbelieving, the way you repeat a word that's just been proven wrong in front of you. I didn't turn around right away. I let it sit there. Then I did turn around, and I found Brittany's face in the crowd, pale, her mouth slightly open, both hands still holding a resin bracelet she'd been about to show a customer, forgotten now, hanging from her fingers like she didn't know what it was for anymore. I walked back toward our booth, not toward her, toward the microphone stand where I'd left my bag. I took out the folded email. I didn't read it aloud. I didn't need to. I simply held it up, once, so she could see what it was, and said, quietly, in a voice that did not shake even though my hands sometimes do. You told a stranger in August that I wasn't really selling. Just doing it as a hobby. I have that email, Brittany. I'm not going to read it to this room. I just want you to know that I have it, and that I know. I did not raise my voice. I want that understood clearly, because the version of this story where I scream into a microphone is not what happened, and it's not who I am. What happened is that a whole room went very quiet, and Brittany, for possibly the first time in the 2 years I've known her as family, had absolutely nothing to say. Here's what happened after, because you deserve to know the after, not just the moment. The Hartford boutique buyer, the whole reason for the logistics conversation 3 weeks earlier, had been standing 8 feet away the entire time, there to scout handmade goods exactly as planned. She did not sign with Brittany and Bloom that day. She came to me instead, and asked if I'd ever consider a small run of quilted table runners for retail. I told her I'd think about it, which was true. I am still thinking about it. Trevor found me that evening, after the fair closed, sitting alone at my kitchen table with a cup of tea I'd let go cold twice that week. He didn't defend Brittany. He didn't ask me to let it go either, which is the first time in 2 years he'd managed not to do either of those things. He asked, quietly, what I wanted to happen next. I laid out the numbers for him the way I'd laid them out for myself that Thursday night. $42,000. 11 payments received. 19 months of silence. I told him I wasn't looking to punish anyone. I told him I wanted a new payment plan, in writing, starting the 1st of next month, and I wanted it because a debt unpaid quietly for 2 years isn't kindness, it's just a slower kind of disrespect. He agreed. The first payment came in on the 5th of November. It has come every month since. Brittany did not apologize at the fair. She apologized 9 days later, at my front door, with Sophie standing slightly behind her, arms crossed, clearly the one who'd walked her mother up my porch steps. It wasn't a perfect apology. She cried more than she explained, and what explanation there was amounted to this: her own mother had spent Brittany's whole childhood calling her hobbies a waste of good countertop space, and somewhere along the way Brittany had decided the only way to matter in this family was to make sure no one else's work took up more room than hers did. I didn't forgive her fully that day. I told her I appreciated her coming, and that we'd see, 1 month at a time, whether her actions matched her words going forward. That's still where we are. 1 month at a time. Anna's Crossing is currently on loan to the National Quilters Society's traveling exhibit, touring 4 cities through next spring. A quilting magazine called last month asking to feature my process. I said yes. I signed the email Margaret A. Whitfield, no nickname, no apology attached to my own name for the first time in longer than I can remember. If you've made it this far with me, I want to leave you with the one thing I keep coming back to. It is entirely possible to be underestimated by the people closest to you, and to say nothing, for years, because you love them and because saying something feels riskier than staying small. But being quiet is not the same as being invisible, and the work you do in a back room, at a kitchen table, under a lamp, at 70 years old or 40 or 25, does not stop being real just because someone standing near you called it a hobby. Love your family. Help them when you can. But never let anyone convince you that being needed and being valued are the same thing, because they are not, and somewhere in your own life, whatever your version of the quilt in the bin under the table is, it is worth carrying to the front of the room yourself. Thank you for listening to my story today. If it meant something to you, tell me in the comments, and subscribe to Alpha Mom Stories, because the old lady in the back with the hobby usually has more going on than anyone at that table realizes.